year or so ago, made a pitch on this, and we had everything planned out. And when he submitted it for this session for the fall meeting, I immediately said yes, because I think it really fits in well to the whole theme that we can sort of consider what we have done in the past and make decisions moving forward and how better to actually change what we're doing in criminal justice. And in white collar, I think that this is something that, at least in our normal bread and butter, if you will, panels, we don't discuss. We sort of segregate out the white collar to our White Collar Institute and all the other things. But I really wanted to ensure that we had a different sort of approach at this year's meeting. And I think this panel does that. And what an just amazing group of panelists. So I'm going to turn over to Jeff. Great guy. He does so much amazing work. I get your newsletters pretty much every day, it seems. But just the breadth of work that he does is just amazing. And so we are so honored to have you and your amazing cast of amazing lawyers to talk to us today. So thank you, and hope you enjoy. You're very, very welcome.
Is this on? Yes? We're good? Good morning, everyone. My name is Jeff Grant. I'm a lawyer, and I wasn't a lawyer for a long time, but I am again, and I'm very, very grateful to be able to say that. I'm also an ordained minister, and for most of the last decade or so, I practiced ministry and co-founded a ministry to support people who were prosecuted for white-collar crimes and their families. And we founded a white-collar support group that meets on Zoom on Monday evenings. This Monday will be our 335th meeting, so we've been doing it for 6.5 years. It is just amazing to be able to expand ministry and compassion and kindness and the kind of identification that I think that we need more of in the legal community. And in that kind of outreach, I've met some wonderful, wonderful lawyers who really want to connect in a more meaningful way with people who have been prosecuted for these crimes. So I'm grateful to be here. This panel, I know everyone here, and although we haven't necessarily all met in person because we meet on Zoom. So it's, we're taller than we thought we were, shorter, I'm fatter, but it's such a beautiful thing. And a lot of us, by the way, are having dinner tonight. So there's like 15 of us having dinner tonight, most of whom have been incarcerated. And most of whom have just only seen each other on Zoom. So you can imagine what an amazing experience that is to all be in the same place at the same time and to celebrate that. Is that better?
Yes.
Oh, okay, sorry. So we are all lawyers who've been convicted and incarcerated for white-collar or nonviolent crimes. And the purpose today is to share our stories, experiences, and difficulties during prosecution and re-entering society after prison. And we will make some recommendations as to how the white-collar bar and the criminal justice system can be more effective, humane, and merciful towards white-collar defendants and their families, while better fulfilling their obligations to enhance rehabilitation through diversion and other alternatives to incarceration. I wrote that, so I hope it makes sense. I'm just going to read off the bios of the people we have here first and get ready to some questions, and just let you know that just because of the format, we only have a limited amount of time to respond to any of these questions, like 3 minutes apiece. But it's such there's so much depth. So please seek us out, and we'll be giving you contact information at the end, or maybe it's in the bios. So the first is Seth Williams, my dear friend. Seth is a graduate of Georgetown University School of Law, who was elected District Attorney of the City of Philadelphia. After graduating from Georgetown, he joined the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office. He formerly served as 10 years as an assistant district attorney. His courtroom experience includes 37 jury trials, more than 1,500 bench trials, and more than 2,500 felony preliminary hearings. In 2017, Seth pled guilty to 29 charges brought against him for bribery, after which he served approximately 3 years in federal prison. Seth is currently a criminal justice advocate and a program leader in Philadelphia. My dear friend Bill Baroni has been a state senator, law professor, attorney, author, deputy executive director of the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, college board chairman, and most recently, federal inmate number 67325-050, before his conviction in the Bridgegate case. Before his conviction, the Bridgegate case was unanimously overturned by the United States Supreme Court. Bill practices law representing people prepared to enter the prison system, having previously practiced with both Hill Wallach in Princeton, New Jersey, and Blank Rome in Trenton and Washington, D.C. Bill's a graduate of the University of Virginia Law School and now teaches law at Seton Hall University Law School, teaching classes on prison law and education law. He's twice been named Professor of the Year. These are all my dear friends, so I think my dear friend Michele Weinstat is a graduate of the New York University School of Law. She currently serves as General Counsel of the Fortune Society, a not-for-profit agency serving those impacted by the criminal justice system. It's a very large agency in New York City. Michele is herself a formerly incarcerated person. She returned to the practice of law following disbarment due to a drug-related felony conviction. Incarceration. She was incarcerated in the New York State prison system at the age of 26. Michele formerly worked at Kelly Dry in New York City, the New York City Administration for Children's Services, served as Vice President Labor Counsel at the New York State Housing Finance Agency, and was Chief of Enforcement at the New York City Conflicts Interest Board. And lastly, my dear friend, Jeff Wertkin, graduated from Georgetown University School of Law, also from which university he also earned a doctorate in government. After starting his legal career at an Law 100 firm, he moved to the public sector where he prosecuted cases under the Civil False Claims Act and served as first chair in several jury trials in federal court. Jeff is the founder of the Diligence Group, a litigation support firm that provides assistance to small firms and solo practitioners in the areas of criminal defense and complex civil litigation. He was prosecuted for corruption charges in 2018 and served approximately 2 years in federal prison. So it's quite a lineup, and I think this is the first time ever that probably 5 people who have been incarcerated, lawyers who've been incarcerated, and have come back to talk about it. So we have a bunch of questions, and we're going to try to get through them. And why don't we just start with Seth and work our way down. Question 1, we were all attorneys who were prosecuted for white-collar and nonviolent crimes. So even with your law experience, what surprised you most about the criminal justice system, the way you were treated as a former lawyer defendant, and the system's fairness or unfairness? Seth, take it away.
All right, good morning. And as Bill mentioned, I was a 759-26066. But it's a pleasure to be here with all of you today. And as I think of your question, Jeff, I'm very thankful for Jeff and the relationships I've built with him and through him with other people that have experienced the same thing that I have. I want to touch on that. But just, you know, I've been an attorney. I graduated from Georgetown Law School. I see one of my classmates here, a friend here. I've been in the Georgetown Criminal Justice Clinic. I was an assistant district attorney for 10.5 years. I served as the elected district attorney for 7.5 years. I've been an Army Judge Advocate General for 19 years as a prosecutor, a defense attorney. I've been a criminal defense attorney. I've been in civil practice. But despite all of that, nothing prepared me for learning that I was a federal target. So I just couldn't imagine, what is it? What did they think I did? And all of the questions I had while I was under investigation weren't things that my attorneys could answer. They weren't questions about procedural law, black letter law. It's just emotional things. Well, what did they think I did? Why? Where? And I didn't know where any of this was going. And it really just brings me back to where I started, the need, because no one understood, right? The white collar community, if you will, all my colleagues just gave me the Heisman. Other elected officials didn't even be in pictures with me. And to explain the emotional, just the things that woke me up in the middle of the night and made me think I was going to lose my dinner, weren't things that a lawyer could answer. I actually had to go to prison prior to my sentencing and listen. I was in solitary confinement for 5 months. And I had to learn from an inmate in the prison, in the cell next to me, through the vent, what RDAP was, what the federal system was, and what to expect and how to deal with it. So a lot of it, as a white collar target, I felt isolated. I felt alone. There was no one I could talk to. My attorney had been a federal prosecutor for a long time. He seemed like he had been buddies and partners with the prosecutors who were prosecuting me. At first I thought that was a good idea. Then I learned he was more friends with them, more concerned about where they were gonna have lunch and their kids' bar mitzvahs and weddings than helping me. So it wasn't until I was able to learn, once I got home, about Jeff and progressive prison ministry, that I began to connect with people that had similar experiences, and it helped me. And so the greatest thing that I learned as a prosecutor that was prosecuted, an attorney that was prosecuted, was that I needed to speak with people that are going through the same thing. And I can only recommend, if there are any white-collar criminal defense attorneys in the room, to connect your clients with people that have gone through it. And that, I think, will make all the difference in many ways. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Seth. Bill?
Lowenstein Sandler, Pryor Cashman, Blank Rome, Sidley and Austin, and Baldessari and Mara. All of those amazing law firms represented me at different times during Bridgegate. Some of the best law firms and some of the most extraordinary lawyers that I've ever worked with. Yet, for all of them, including my dear friend Mike Levy, who I sat next to on the first day of orientation at UVA Law School, we sat next to each other. And he became my appellate and Supreme Court lawyer. Of course, there's that great line, in one of those law school movies where you look to your right, look to your left. One of you won't be here at the end of law school. It's like, at UVA, it's like, look to your right, look to your left. One of you will represent the other. But for all these amazing lawyers, one of the consistent themes, and I take off what my friend Seth just said, one of the things I heard over and over again, and they're right, which is I can't be your lawyer and your psychiatrist. I can't be your lawyer and your counselor. I can't be your lawyer, which is true, right? And there were times that were really difficult, and they had to be your lawyer, and that was hard sometimes. And the question that Jeff asked about fairness and unfairness. So I had this whole list of great firms, and then I go into Loretto Federal Prison. And I meet my friend Ralph from the Bronx, who didn't have any of those firms. So I have some of the most extraordinary law firms in America representing me, and I'm in the same place as this amazing young guy from the Bronx who had nobody helping. So 2 observations come from that. One is, when you have a client who's going through this, find them a counselor. Find them someone, whether it's through Jeff's group or any of us. Some of the best advice that I finally got was after my trial, but during the appellate process. I was out on bail pending appeal, and until I went in. Is find someone for them to talk to. But in addition to that, is to look for, and I know everyone in this room, because the fact is you're here, is that you do work on a pro bono basis, but find those routes, find those clients who just have nobody else, because they need the help. And seek out, or for your clients, seek out, you want fairness, seek out organizations like Jeff's, like Interrogating Justice, which is a great not-for-profit, leaders of whom are here today, who really help people, and connect your clients with people who have been through this been through this process, because it is enormously difficult, especially in areas of what people perceive to be high-profile cases. All of us, which had, Seth and I certainly had high-profile cases. And as you all know, my case became a gate. Right? When you reach gate status, you know, right? And I'll finish with this. It's a true story. When Bridgegate first started, it involved people, and it involved a candidate for president of the United States. At the time, a front runner for president of the United States, right? So this was a massive amount of publicity. It was oppressively, and it was day after day, night after night on the news. And one of the people who was leading that coverage was someone who I admire a great deal. I think was a very good journalist, Rachel Maddow. So night after night, especially when Bridgegate was just starting, even pre-gate-dom of Bridgegate, right? It was night after night after night. And when you're a lawyer, you've never been through anything like this. It was oppressive. About 2 years later, I met with Rachel Maddow. And she comes, and we met at 30 Rock. We met at Rockefeller Center, where NBC News is. And she walks in the conference room, and she says, "Hi, I'm Rachel." I said, "Hi, I'm Bill." And she says, "Okay, you can yell at me. What did we get wrong?" And I looked at her, I said, I'm not going to yell at you. I said, I should thank you. I said, because when I would go out in Hell's Kitchen in New York, people would come up to me and say, "I just saw you on the Rachel Maddow show." I said, "I got dates out of the fact." And then I went to prison. So my advice to you is, especially in cases that are high profile, you need to find your clients somebody to talk to, because as Seth points out, I know my colleagues will say, your world goes from 100 people to 2 people. Like you have Ebola, people just run away, and it becomes a very lonely place, and you don't want to burden your family with it. So that is a tip, is to find people that have been fellow travelers.
Hi, Michele, as a former inmate, I would say, I hope your date's at commissary. All right. So now you know where I've been. I have a very different story than everybody else here. I was an addict at 13 years old, and somehow managed to be an NYU law graduate at 22 years old, and managed to be disbarred by 25, 26 years old. So it took me about as long to get disbarred as it took me to get through law school. So I was prosecuted under the New York Rockefeller laws, which many of you know, that after a certain quantity, which was not that much in the scheme of things, over a few ounces of cocaine, you would face the same sentence as somebody who was convicted of premeditated murder. And so at 25 years old, I believe, I was going through Rikers Island. I was hit with bails that I could not afford, and that my father was deceased, but my mother could not afford. And all the drug dealers I knew, they ran to the hills. So just like your experience, but all of my associates, I was not practicing law at that time. I had been at a Kelly Joy and Warren, a large firm, and had decided to become a drug dealer instead of staying in the practice of law, because I thought, in my drug-addled brain, I thought that was just a rational, decision tree decision. So that's what happened to me. The thing that was startling, well, first off, the only reason I did not do, well, there's 2 reasons why I did not do 15 years to life. I had a 16-count felony indictment, and then I was indicted twice more on other cases. The first was that when the police came in the room, they didn't have a warrant, and I was a young attorney who was not working, but I knew enough to put my hands in front of the door and say, "You cannot come in here." And the officer, promptly picked me up and threw me out of the way of the door. Now, I spent 4 days, I knew I was charged with an A1 felony, and I spent 4 days in the bullpens, because back then they didn't have a limit on how many days you'd sleep on a bullpen floor, unwashed, unsleeping, kicking heroin, and I met one of my law school classmates in the arraignment court, and I said, "This is what happened. Isn't that illegal?" Because I don't know about you guys, but I was very young, right? But the law went out of my brain. I figured, it can't possibly be that they thought it was okay to just pick me up and throw me out of the way of the door and go in and search. Well, it wasn't okay. But the things I had, I just, echoing what we were talking about this morning, I had huge privilege. I had an attorney who stayed on the case even though I didn't pay him, because I think I reminded him of his daughter. And they constantly talked about me as if I was a tragedy. Now, I was a tragedy. Clearly, I was a tragedy. And I certainly didn't deserve 15 years to life, for my offense. But I think there was way more sympathy because I was a young white female graduate of NYU who had not gotten 3 years out of school before I was facing 15 to life in prison. So I definitely had that kind of privilege. And I also had really good legal representation, at least until my lawyer got tired of not getting paid. He thought my parents should pay it, but my parents didn't have any money. So for that period of time, they fought the legal, whether I had standing to object to the search. And ultimately, on a very fine legal argument, it was decided that I did have standing. And I ended up pleading to the smaller cases. I didn't actually go to the state prison system. I was twice. I was once on Rikers for several weeks, got bailed out, and then I was remanded because I wouldn't stop committing crimes. And I ended up on Rikers for several more months until I was let free on the 2020 motion for lack of speedy trial. The other thing that was interesting, and then I'll be quiet, is just to the point of diversity, was that I had two co-defendants. One was a Latino male, and one was an African American male. And they kept on trying to say that I was the girl who just happened to be there. They both worked for me. I'm like being totally transparent about the fact that I had made my addiction into an enterprise. Both of these gentlemen worked with me, for me, and one had a bail almost 10 times as high as mine. And the other one they kind of knew was pretty far into the innocence bracket. But so anyway, that I did have a huge amount of privilege, but I also, we'll talk more, but I also have definitely gone through the last 30 years of having to address that conviction when I was 25 years old. Every interview, my entire life I've had a career where I addressed my drug use in my 20s and teens.
Hi, I'm Jeff Wertkin. In 2010, I joined the Department of Justice in the Civil Division, prosecuting civil False Claims Act cases. And I was a tough negotiator. I came in there, I set the terms. I was difficult to deal with, and that was something that was really celebrated. I got high settlements on cases that other people had passed on, and I was rewarded with bigger cases and more high profile cases. And over my 6 years there, I was negotiating settlements in the $50 to $150 million range on a regular basis. That did not, you would think that would have prepared me for when I was arrested and when the prosecutors in my case were tough negotiators. And I had been indicted for obstruction of justice charge, and when my attorney told me, oh, they're going to add this, and they're going to add that, and they're going to add this, and I said, well, there's no way. None of that could possibly work. And I started, my strength was researching and writing, and I wrote memos with the white-hot intensity of someone whose freedom was at stake, because it was. And I passed those memos to my attorney. And they were detailed and long about why the prosecutors were being unfair, and they weren't, dealing with the facts, and they were piling on. And I gave it to my attorney, and my attorney said, okay, thank you for this, but this is not how the game is played. They are setting the negotiation terms. They are running the show, and this is not helping. And I was so mad, and then I thought about it. I was like, wow, karma is a lemon. And I think that it was a matter of perspective for me. What did I learn? Despite being, I know I wasn't doing criminal stuff, but despite being at the Justice Department, now that I was dealing with the Justice Department, I couldn't get over the unfairness of it. And but don't you want to read what I wrote? It will convince you. And I think that's kind of goes back to what you were saying, Seth, about the emotional side of it, right? There's an emotional component of being in this situation that I wasn't prepared for. and that nothing that I had worked on prepared me for.
Thanks, Jeff. Question 2. Given your experience, what diversion programs and alternatives to incarceration do you think would better serve the goals of deterrence, rehabilitation, and the public good, while having the least impact on innocent victims and families? But why don't you just keep going down? That's it.
So when I think about that, I really think that the biggest victims in my situation, I had a gate as well. It was a gift gate in Philadelphia, and I had been very sloppy in my personal life. As a result, I think of just trying to numb myself from being the DA. I had 600 employees, 70,000 cases a year. I decided who got the death penalty, who didn't. I had to go to crime scenes when police officers were murdered or buildings collapsed on firefighters. It was just an emotional drain that I was not prepared for. I was prepared, operationally and strategically to be the DA, but I wasn't prepared for the emotional toll. And I began to numb myself with too many martinis and Jack Daniels, as almost every lawyer went to every night. There's black tie events and red carpets and free booze, and I just numbed myself. And that led me to making bad decisions in my personal life that were used in this prosecution against me. And I take full responsibility for not reporting gifts. But when it comes to preventing crime, I teach criminology, I teach at law schools. And we either have to try to change the behavior of victims, change the behavior of the perpetrators, or change the environment. And so I understand that when it comes to Philadelphia, I tell Jeff and people on the Zoom, every day in Philadelphia, people are getting shot, murdered, raped. But it appeared, and for those cases, it's not the severity of punishment that changed behavior. It's the certainty. It's not that someone gets 1,000 years. It's just when something happens, there's a stop, a correction, an accountability, and you move forward. But it appears like and again, this is my own personal perspective. Jeff doesn't espouse this maybe, but there's no rhyme or reason as to why the feds do what they do. It's just they put their finger up and this is the crime du jour, or this is the person, and you've got more enemies. I don't know. But what I think, my children were the biggest victims with what happened to me. They went from being considered little princesses in the city to, not being able to stay in their school. And so if you were to ask me what could be done, I think more education. So I know that many people on the panel on our Monday night Zoom just try to talk to each other. I speak to a lot of my friends who are elected officials in Philadelphia about self-care and just trying to take care of themselves, not falling into numbing themselves with the martinis and Jack Daniels like I did. And to try to make sure, to recognize, I was the first elected district attorney in the history of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that was African American, right? People told me that there's a target on my back. I thought, no, we're in a post-racial world. Nothing like, so I try to tell my friends that, you've got to dot all your I's, cross all your T's. What I was prosecuted for, if it had been in state court, I would have just maybe I could have resigned, that would have been good enough. And that was even so I think to prevent these things, really it's just more education. I don't know what type of diversionary program you could have in my situation, but I think what I try to do personally is just try to educate my friends, to dot their I's, cross their T's, and if something seems to be too good to be true, it probably is. And don't even just open any doors that might just bring you into somebody's crosshairs.
Thanks, Seth.
Nothing good has come out of COVID. Hundreds of thousands of people have died, millions across the world. But if there's one piece of knowledge outside of medicine that we have gained from the terrible COVID experience, is that there is a very real, provable alternative to some incarceration. For years, criminal defense lawyers have argued, my client shouldn't go to prison, give them home confinement, my client shouldn't go to prison. And it was ignored because it was recidivism, people are gonna do it again. What we have seen as a result of CARES Act relief, compassionate release throughout COVID, is that tens of thousands of people have been released from federal prisons and 98, 99% have not committed a crime. So for the first time, we have actual real data on a significant level that you do not need to put everyone in prison to achieve justice. And I'm hopeful that this data will eventually work its way through the system. And I see my friend Peter Tomasek is here. Peter, raise your hand. Peter is with Interrogating Justice, has been doing enormously good work writing information about CARES Act and First Step Act. And I think that that is a model for judges and the Bureau of Prisons and for Congress, that you do not need to, Ralph from the Bronx did not need to be in prison. Like there was no, forget us, like we're politicians, they want to send a message, they want to, we're going to send it. But there's so many people who do not need, they're nonviolent, they have addiction issues, and the solution to the addiction issue is to put them in prison without services. That's crazy. Like, you can be a Republican or a Democrat, a conservative or a liberal, but you look at something like that and you go, this system isn't actually working. And we now have start seeing some data of a system that may actually be better to achieve the ends of justice, while at the same time also achieving the ends of keeping families together, giving people a better chance of rehabilitation. Like all the things we say, on my first day of prison law, when I teach my students, we talk about what's the goals of incarceration, right? And never in the time that I've taught it is the first thing that comes up punishment. But yet we've built a system that easily the first thing we do is punishment. And I'm hopeful that this data that we've gathered from CARES Act and COVID will lead us in the direction both from judges giving sentences and Congress writing legislation like the First Step Act and whatever comes after it that will get people home either to begin with or a lot quicker because the system's not working.
So I don't see us as being different than any other people that, other than the fact that we're not violent and we might not be going out and, robbing a little old lady's pocketbook tomorrow if they don't put us away. But so I think that alternative to incarceration programs that are really, like we do it at the Fortune Society, where people can be put into diversion. We now in New York, we're running a program with supervised release, so people who are out on bail who haven't been convicted are starting to get all these educational services and the like. And we're looking at what things keep people from being quote unquote recidivists. We're looking at what things make people desist from committing further crimes. Now I think the humiliation that all of us went through and the pain that we caused our families might have been enough. It wasn't enough to get me to stop using drugs, but it might have been enough for me to stop doing major crimes. And for you guys, it probably was enough to stop all those activities. But so I don't think that to not continue to commit crimes that I needed to go to prison for a length of time, which is what folks are saying. But I do think that we need to look at the things that folks need when they're in these situations. Like, if I was, incarcerated the first time for about a month, and in that time I lost my apartment. Like you don't have to be, white collar, blue collar, no collar to lose your housing if you're incarcerated. And so then what happens when you come out, And for us as attorneys, I think what I've seen, and I've known a bunch of disbarred attorneys as well, is that when you, and all of us can impact on this issue, is that when you have automatic disbarment with a felony conviction, you create a system where people are not qualified for any job, that they can't even go back into being of service in their community. They can't rehabilitate themselves because a lot of it is choice. If you're going to be rehabilitated, you could either go this way or that, and you have to make an internal choice about it. But we break people down in our criminal justice system, white collar, blue collar. We break people down, and then we don't give them an ability to pull themselves back up. So, what I would say if we were thinking about attorneys is that automatic disbarment for felony convictions, in addition to making such a high bar to being admitted if you've had a conviction, so that people can't create lives where they could be of service to their communities. Like we're putting barriers that are destructive of the person and of society in front of people who have criminal justice history. And I think when we stop that and just work on what we can do to enable people to better themselves, then we'll be in a better place.
Thanks, Michele.
I just want to pull on two threads that Bill and Michele talked about. I think that, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, the statistics that Bill cited have been kind of widely disseminated. I follow the Sentencing Project and also Prison Advocates, and they've done a lot of work on and you can go, the numbers are staggering about the people who got released during the COVID period. And this wasn't, what I think is important also to add on to what you were saying, is that this wasn't an accident, and they didn't just willy-nilly, oh, we're just gonna release everybody. There was a implementation of the Attorney General's memorandum, and there was a system in place to decide, okay, who is eligible for this early release program. And so not only did we learn that some of these folks are not dangerous to society, but that the folks who are making the decisions in the Bureau of Prisons are capable of distinguishing them, right? That we're able to look at a population and say, all right, if we release this population or do not incarcerate them, we can choose to an incredibly high degree of effectiveness who is going to have recidivism issues. And so I think that is really important. You know, does society need to be protected from this group of people? And if they do, incarceration might be the answer. You know, I live in Washington D.C. And I think we heard about Philadelphia. Like, there are some places where incarceration might be right for a certain population based on certain crimes and characteristics. But we do know and have implemented, and now we have data to support the fact that there are some people for whom is not necessary. You do not need to protect society from this group of people, and we have the data to support that. I will say something that I'm not sure everybody will agree with who's been in the federal, who's been incarcerated, or even people on this stage, but I was incarcerated for 13 months, and that was the least punitive part of my entire experience. I know that's not true, that everybody can say that. I was in a camp, but it was the least punitive part of it. And I do think that coming home, losing my license, the mandatory, losing my license, friends, respect, reputation, of everybody, you know, everybody that I'm involved with, that was going to happen whether I was incarcerated or not.
That's actually a great segue into our next question, which is, as a former lawyer all of us served time in prison, what was the most difficult identity issues and barriers to reentry you faced upon release? You could discuss it professionally, personally, emotionally. So, Seth.
Yeah, I think, Jeff, that was a great segue to, as I'm just sitting here, there's so many different things I would like to say, I just don't know where to go, and it's just that, you know, I lost my reputation, I lost my elected office, I lost my house, I lost my law license, I lost time with loved ones, I lost my military career and pension. I've been in the Army for 19 years, 1 month. I needed 11 more months to get my Army pension. That's gone. The city took my pension. That would have been $122,000 a year every year when I turned 55, which was last January. All that was lost. And I spent 60 months I was sentenced to 60 months, and I'm spending about 34 months. And so, but again, yeah, the time I was in was actually the least punitive of everything, considering what they charged me with, as I see it. Right? I know it almost sounds like wah, 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 wah when I talk about what I was charged with. And so what was very difficult is that, again, unlike guys who I had defended when I was a defense attorney or prosecuted who were selling drugs, their friends who they had made an agreement, they're selling drugs, their friends knew if you go away, these guys knew what to expect. Or their friends knew to take their kids Christmas gifts or send money on their books for commissary. I had nobody doing any of those things. Everybody gave me the Heisman, like I told you, right? I thought that coming home from having watched, I don't know, Shawshank Redemption or different movies, right, TV, that's all I knew. Coming home would be like, oh, running through a field of daffodils and sunflowers to my family and hugging me, and there'd be puppies everywhere. You know, these people were really hurt, and they had no one to take it out on but on me. They understood that I hadn't, you know, that me driving my city vehicle wasn't felonious, my kids thought, to take them to their lacrosse games, but it became a car gate. So I think what was very difficult was expecting, okay, here I no longer have my law license, but I think now I know more about the criminal justice system. I was in prison. I taught GED for 3 years to men that before I really didn't understand. But I saw, you know what, these guys are incredibly intelligent. Most of them were there for ghost drugs, which is a thing, which I never heard of as a local prosecutor, but the feds prosecute people for drugs they never even confiscate. To learn their stories and learn about their trauma, and to learn how most of them never had problems getting jobs, they had problems keeping jobs. I thought I could be very valuable coming home, or could help a white-collar criminal defense attorney with their clients, or even progressive organizations that claim to be helping returning citizens. They don't mean guys who've been prosecutors that come home. They meant somebody else. So coming home was extremely difficult. You know, my probation, I thought that in prison they teach people to prepare to come home. No, not at all. My probation officer met me on the turnpike, put an electronic monitor on my ankle, said, you gotta have a place to live, you gotta get a job. Did anybody help me get a place to live or a place to work? No. So I worked at Lowe's overnight from 7 p.m. to 5:30. But I felt God had me in the right place though, every step of the way. I just didn't understand it, right? But it was just very difficult, and it still is. So the most difficult part was just having to try to reimagine and reinvent myself and just to surrender to God, what God wants to do with me. And it's going to be different than what I had expected. But in many ways, I find it even more meaningful. You know, I run a vocational training center for returning citizens and homeless veterans and the chronically unemployed. I think I'm doing more to prevent crime than I did when I was a DA. So my dad did more, I think, to prevent crime than I did when I was a DA because he was a school teacher and ran a rec center at night and day camp in the summer. Returning home is more difficult than I expected, especially family relationships that still haven't been healed.
Thank you, Seth.
I was in a weird, somewhat unique position because, you know, after the Third Circuit threw out half of my charges, but kept half the charges, I knew I was going to get resentenced and had to make a decision. You know, I had a co-defendant, Bridget Kelly, who had very young kids, but I have much older parents. They're now 80. And don't tell them I said much older. And I had to make a decision, so I chose to go in. You know, Bridget stayed out pending the Supreme Court. But my sister was like, "What's the odds of the Supreme Court taking this case?" Right? 1 in 20,000, 1 in 10,000. So they did take it, and I was released. I had an 18-month sentence, but was released after serving about 3 months. And then we won in the Supreme Court, won unanimously in the Supreme Court. And yet, even winning unanimously in the Supreme Court of the United States, 9-0 in a court that can't agree on what time of day it is, right? I get home and I get a letter from Chase Bank closing my credit cards. Interestingly, the opening line of the letter was that they had determined that I was a reputational risk to their bank. I'm like, you people crash the world economy. You're a reputational risk to me, right? But they, you know, so here I am, 9-0, winning the Supreme Court, no criminal record, and they're closing my bank accounts. You're Ralph from the Bronx,
Right.
You're Bob from New Jersey, another friend. You, good luck. So we say, you know what, Seth, Bill, Michele, you committed a crime. You did something against the sort of the societal rules. Jeff, you broke the law, and we're going to send you to prison. We're going to rehabilitate you, but we know that 98% of you are going to come out of prison. So what system have we built? You get out of prison, whether it's after 3 years or 3 months, you get out of prison. You can't get a bank account, which means if you can get a job, you're going to get paid and you got to go to a check cashing place, right? And so you can't get so then you have to get an apartment, but how do you get an apartment if you can't get a bank account? So now you're paying cash to an apartment, so where are you living? So you can't get an apartment, you can't get a bank account, and then you go for a job. And in many states, if you're a felon for any definition, they can prevent you from getting a job. So we've built a system that you can't get an apartment, can't get a bank account, get a job. And then we say, oh my gosh, how could you possibly commit a crime again? Like that's, as I said it before, that's a crazy system. forget if you like them, like you want to be harsher penalties or weaker penalties, or mandatory minimums or no mandatory minimums. The system is silly. And the way, the problem is when you're living through it, it's almost Star Chamber-like, right? We're not helping people. We say as a society, we want to rehabilitate you, get back, we have, full member of society, you did your time, but then we don't build a system that works. I think the answer to that, some of it is legislative, right? Some of which is Congress banning financial institutions from throwing people who are in the prison system off of banks outside of potentially bank fraud, right? But it wasn't exactly like I robbed a bank. You could say I shouldn't be able to touch traffic cones again, but it's like, right? It's like,
Definitely not.
right? Don't be careful, I'll block your driveway. In all seriousness, or prevents in some states prevent people from using ban the box, prevent people from not being employed purely based on a family. That's things that policymakers can actually do. And finally, do education in the incarceration system for what's coming when you get out.
Yeah.
Right? And not sort of but an actual, use the first step at the federal level or state versions of it to legislatively tell the Bureau of Prisons or Departments of Correction and say, part of the exit has got to be a concrete plan to have someone know this is where you can get a bank account, this is where you can get a job, and have those resources be structured, not sort of as, oh yeah, Jim told me this is somebody I can talk to, right? Have a structured plan within the system. I think if you do those three things, ban financial institutions from throwing people off of their bank accounts or preventing them from getting a bank account based purely on a felony, 2, ban the box for hiring, and then also do training within the prison system.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you. I could see the George Washington Bridge from my window at home, so I feel very personal. Oh gosh, I'm in trouble. But I will say this: that prison was extremely. I mean, I didn't go to prison. I went to jail, which is a distinction. And Rikers Island was a hell. It was a hellhole. And it was a war, and it was violent, and it was traumatizing. And I write fiction. It's in my bio that you guys got. So I'm not pitching my fiction. But what I will say is that incarceration always comes out in my fiction. There's always something that comes out because I'm still 30 years later, still doing this catharsis thing. And if you write fiction, you know that you're not really thinking through necessarily what you're going to write. It just comes out, and so that tends to come out all the time. It was, for the amount of time I was there, the trauma lasted for decades. And I also would, we do at the Fortune Society, pitching my agency again, we go into the prisons and the jails. We have whole crews that go into Rikers Island every day, and we do training, we sign them up, we intake them, we try to get people to come in. And the other day, we got a call from the prison system for a guy who did 45 years, and they said, he's got nowhere to live, he's got nowhere to go, please take him. And so we're really working on housing him. We took him, and I met him his first day out of prison, and it was the most moving thing. And we gave him a phone, and all the guys were helping him learn how to use the phone, which went off right in the middle of the meeting, because everybody forgave him for that because he didn't know how to silence it. But to be involved in that whole process is such a helpful thing. But we do see that people are much more successful if they're engaged before, and it becomes a very political issue, because if you have people going for college credits that the state is paying for, the minute you get somebody in there who's like, why aren't my kids getting free college? It saves a lot of money when you give people college. And we have more than half of my agency have incarceration history, and more than a third of our executives have incarceration history, and some of our senior executives have done decades in prison and have PhDs now. So it really, they're not going to be the ones recommitting crimes. I would say also the Fair Chance Act that we have in New York. If you're not in New York, please try to get one in your state. It has made a huge difference. The difference between me and my colleagues here is that I was in my early career when I was disbarred, and I had got my license back when I was in my 30s. And so my entire career basically, was with a felony conviction. And I have to say, in my 50s, applying for general counsel jobs, I had to strategize in every interview, when do I bring up the felony conviction? Do I present myself as being, I could do this for you, I could do that for you, I've done this, I've done that, or do I, start off with the felony conviction and give them a bad impression? So not only did I have the normal difficulties of any interview, but I had to figure out how to strategically bring up and to talk with people in an interview about my drug use in my 20s and my teens is a little bit odd. I actually interviewed for the general counsel in the New York City Department of Corrections maybe 8 years ago, 10 years ago, and I ended up, they were so freaked out that I had been incarcerated on Rikers, which since then our deputy CEO at Fortress Society did end up running the prison system, the New York City jail system, Stanley Richards, but at that time it was a little bit earlier, and all I could talk about was my drug history, in my 20s. So the Fair Chance Act is a really helpful thing to have, where you don't get to ask about a criminal conviction until you've made a conditional offer of employment. And it's inconvenient for the Fortune Society, because it's, for us, we want you to have a criminal justice history, so that's an affirmative action thing, and it makes it a risk for us to talk about it in an interview. But other than our very small segment of the employer population, I think this kind of a thing where people aren't forced to check off the box, which stopped me from getting dozens and dozens of jobs throughout my career, and also having to speak about it during an interview. Stopping that will go a long way to helping, white, blue, no collar, helping everybody who's had a criminal justice history.
Jeff?
Well, we all got the questions in advance from Jeff, but we didn't discuss the answers, and I got the privilege of going last. So my anecdotes of not being welcome to apply to progressive places, and my bank accounts being closed so I couldn't pay my mortgage for a couple of months, and strategizing about when do you say it, not too early, not too late. All those have been taken. So what I'm going to do in my talking about for barriers of entry, what surprised me the most was the categories of people who were supportive and who, as you eloquently put it, gave me the Heisman. And if you had asked me, and I don't know if this is like an exercise you could do, like if I was in this situation, if I found myself in a situation, who among my family and friends and my colleagues would embrace me and give me a chance, and who would give me the Heisman, I was shocked about how that played out, and it really wasn't who you would expect. Like when I was in prison, I was like, I'll be fine. I made a mistake, but it was a singular event. You can't take away my law education. You can't take. I have a PhD. I can do advanced statistical analysis. Like I'm gonna be fine. I'm gonna get out. And I created a folder for all the places I applied to, progressive this and advocates that. And I live in Washington D.C. There, you can't spit off of a building without hitting somebody who works for a nonprofit that's advocating for criminal justice, and nobody, and the problem was, I would say it at an interview, and that would be the end. That would be the wall. And so I started moving it back, and then I started moving it up a little bit. That didn't feel right. And so the folks who are, advocating were the least, folks who are embracing, and that was so strange in terms of. I've worked with attorneys. I work a lot with solo practitioners right now, and folks who have had their own run-ins with the law, and either it didn't go anywhere, and so they never got disbarred, or folks who, when you're in a position like I was, very vulnerable, it's very, very public, people open up to you, and people have told me things like, that has happened to them that no one really knows about, like very, very, very private things. And I think those are the people who can put themselves in the position of someone, well, God, if it had just gone a different way on this day, I could have been in your shoes. And those are the folks who have that kind of empathy, that have, extended, opportunities to me, and You know, I think that is like the most surprising thing, that if you put people in camps, if I had put people in camps, I would be really, really shocked about how it shook out. But I feel very fortunate that I've been able to find those people, not just for employment's sake, but also like emotional sake. I mean, we have all the same stories, right? We have all the same thoughts, and that's why Jeff's group is so great. And the existence of Zoom, right, and the existence of the internet 20 years ago, people didn't have that opportunity. And I think that groups like yours and other groups out there that can bring people together take those barriers of entry and really take a sledgehammer to them. And I'm really grateful to be part of it.
We're gonna change your name to Mr. Segway. It's perfect. You've probably already figured out that Monday nights can be intense. It's kind of like going to an AA meeting, and so there's a lot of laughter, but there's a lot of crying. There's a lot of sharing of very personal information, and it's beautiful. It's just beautiful. It's just such a we say that our job is to come out of isolation and into community, and that's what's gonna save us. And I think that we've all proven that that's true, and so we just keep forging forward. Nonetheless, this is about our unique position as former lawyers, some of us now lawyers again. So after all you've been through, why did you decide to get reinstated to the bar? Or if you haven't yet made that decision, kind of what's on your mind? Why would you go back into the legal profession? Seth?
So, me personally, I worked so hard to get accepted into law school, to get through law school at Georgetown. Probably still gonna pay back some more of my loans at some point. Part of me, I worked so hard, I just want to get that degree back. And also to show my daughters, to prove to people, that you can get something back, you can just reclaim that. That's part of it. A bigger part of it, though, is just I think that I would be much better at being an advocate from what I've learned through my own life experience. By having a guy in the cell next to me who had been on death row for 14 years in Pennsylvania, where his best friend was Mumi Abu Jamal, who had killed a police officer in Philadelphia, and I had done a lot to try to keep him there. And becoming friends with one of my best friends when I was in solitary. I'd meet him for, when they had me in my own caged area for an hour of rec, walking around in a 7 by 12 foot cyclone fenced area, was a guy named SK. He gave me good advice every day. I didn't know he was a serial killer. That's why his nickname was SK. Or this one guy whose name was White Mike. His co-defendant was Mike, who was black, so they called him White Mike. He had tattoos over his eyelids that said, "Don't sleep." He looked like Eminem. The guy gave me some really good advice. I met some very, in a different way, but very wise people. But I taught in law schools, I've taught in undergrad, I've taught master's programs in strategic leadership, I've taught in the Army. I always feel so I learn more from my students than what I give them. I learned much more in prison from the men that I was living with, who I learned from. Many of them didn't have GEDs. And so I think, Jeff, that if I aspire to get my license back, I know it's gonna be a process, it might be difficult, but I believe that if I were to get it back, I could help people. Like the same thing I wrote on my, personal statement to Georgetown that got me accepted, by why Andy Kornblatt and them accepted me at Georgetown. Is because I really want to help people. And I think that now I could do better. And I was listening to everyone. I could repeat what they all said, but when I was listening to Bill speak, right? When I came home, I worked at Lowe's for 8 months overnight. I saved up enough money to get an apartment. I went and applied. First thing, oh, no. You went to prison. No, I couldn't get an apartment. Somebody gave me a scooter so I could get around. Right? Because I didn't have enough money for a car. I was just catching public transportation. A friend who was moving to North Carolina gave me an old knockoff Vespa looking thing. I tried to get insured. I used to have USA, AA, right? I'd been a major in the Army. They denied me because I had a record. Couldn't even pay to get insurance on something. So I think my experience and why I would aspire to get my license back, because I think I could be a better advocate. I deal with men and women every day, this program that I run, that have all types of barriers. and trying to help them remove the barriers. I think it's my best way of trying to prevent crime and to reduce recidivism is using my own life experience to help those that are going through it, and to maybe advocate for other people to help change the system in all the different ways that the people in the panel have mentioned.
That's beautiful, Seth. Thank you. Bill?
I would say two reasons. I mean, I guess three. One, you work so hard to get your law license, you want it back. I had the good fortune, because the way my case ended, it came back very quickly. I mean, New Jersey, the District of Columbia, was within a week I was reinstated. In New York, took a couple more weeks. But two reasons why I'm glad I have it back and I wanted it back. The first is the attorney-client privilege, is that I can deal with people going through the incarceration system as an attorney. And there are people who I advise and who have become clients who are about to go into prison that want to be able to have conversations with the attorney-client privilege. So I'm able to do that. So that's one reason. And the second is teaching. I taught at Seton Hall Law School, not in criminal justice, but I taught for 15 years before Bridgegate happened, and then obviously didn't teach. And I got to go back to teaching and wrote a class for Seton Hall that I now teach in the middle of the semester now on prison law. Because so much of criminal justice teaching is, cops and robbers, and then bail to jail. But there's that whole third section of law dealing with people in the incarceration system, coming out of the incarceration system, dealing with the First Step Act, which is going to have years of litigation. And so I wrote the class for Seton Hall on prison law. They never had it before. And my first time teaching, which was last year, I had 25 students. And this semester I have 55 students. And these are students who are, many of whom are committed to going into the practice of law in this area. There is, and Georgetown has one with Sean Hopwood, and there's a few other law schools around the country that are specifically teaching in the area of post-conviction, pre-home law, and I think that's going to be good for the system when all of a sudden you have all these young lawyers coming into the system with knowledge not just of criminal law, but also what can be done for people in the incarceration system and coming out of it. And having my law license back has allowed me to get back in the classroom and create a class like that to help in a very small way, build a new generation of advocates for people who are in that third phase of criminal law.
Thank you, Bill. Michele?
So I fought for years to get my license back. I went through maybe 2 years of document submissions and hearings and the like, and the impetus to do it is almost like irresistible. I know only one attorney that was disbarred that didn't try to get their license back, and for whatever their reason. But it is, it's like it's instinctive. It's like I lost this. It was like I might not have valued it when I had it, but now that I've lost it, I want it back. And I would actually say that it was a huge incentive for me to get clean, because it was like, there was a 7-year minimum disbarment in New York. And so I used for the first 3.5 years, and then I was like, being the wise lawyer that I was like, I better get clean now. And I say this in a sort of a humorous way, but I'm living in a hot, waterless, heatless apartment with like rodents, and I could barely keep a welfare case open, and I needed that goal to just decide to get my life back. I needed to get my stuff back, the things that I had lost. And sometimes I think that there might have been other interesting careers that I could have gone after instead, but that was the direction. It's such a trauma to lose it that it's really important. And my self-esteem was so low from the process of both addiction, prosecution, incarceration, poverty, domestic abuse. You go through all of those things. Like, I had to do these things to be able to feel good about myself and my life, and then also dedicate myself to public service. I've never done anything but public service since I had my license back, which was 1995. I got it back.
Thank you, Michele. Jeff?
This I found to be the most personal and difficult question on the list. My process started in 2017. It was still very fresh and new to me, and I don't know. I struggle with this all the time. When this happened to me, I wanted to close the book on my law life, and I tried. And then I was in prison, and I didn't tell anyone I was a lawyer. But then I was in RDAP, and someone found out that I was a lawyer. And once the camp knew that I was a trained lawyer, a lot of people were coming to me for help. The First Step Act got passed while I was inside, and so there was a lot of work to do. And I'm not exaggerating, hundreds of people who were coming to me and helping me. Can you help me get this? You know, they weren't hearing from their public defender fast enough, and and people were inside. People are very cagey, and they're not quick to share their whole story. And people would come to me and share their whole story because we needed it to write the memo. And I helped people every single day, 3-4 people a day to write things. And I was like, oh man, I'm getting drawn back into the law. And I got out and I was like, all right, I'm gonna go a different direction. I'm gonna try to do advocacy work. And I got a job in operations, and I thought, okay, I'm gonna just chart a new path. And I had a friend of mine call, like, I have this big case. I really need like serious, good paralegal work. Will you help me? And I was like, oh, okay. And I got back into it, and I was like, oh my God, I love this. I love this so much. I love the research of it. I love the writing of it. I love the law so much. So I'm still struggling with it. I don't know what I'm going to do. There's a 5-year waiting period, which is not till next spring, so I don't have to decide. But I would like to. There's part of me that would like to move on and close the chapter, and there's part of me that is drawn back in for all the right reasons, right? I love it. And you know, I'm not the greatest, but I'm good at it. And when you love something that you're good at, you should do it. I tell my kids that. And so, you know, that's kind of where I'm at.
At my reinstatement hearing, they asked me, why did you wait 16 years to apply for readmission to the bar? And I said, I wasn't waiting to do anything. I was doing other things. You know, I went to seminary, I worked in churches in the inner city, I had a life. But it just feels like the bar looks at us through a very specific lens. Like, how could you not want your law license back? And I didn't know, for most of that time, I didn't know that I wanted it back. I was doing God's work. So the fact that it brought me back here is why we're here, one of the reasons we're here today. But I just think that it's important to understand that our motivations aren't necessarily the same as the way that the bar would look at us. And it's important for, at least for me, it was important for me to have my motives clear and be grounded in that. All right, we only have a few minutes left. So just for our last question, and if you could just get through this quickly, what's your big takeaway from all of this? If you were going to talk about your experience in, say, a law school class, what's the cautionary tale? And also feel free to give your contact information if you'd like. Seth.
Wow. So I really don't know what the biggest takeaway is that I could share publicly, especially when I'm being videotaped. But just for me personally, it was just an amazing spiritual journey that, you know, I made decisions later that my life is better in many ways. And I wouldn't have made those decisions if I had continued in elected politics or whatever I was doing. So, you know, I really don't know what more to say. My biggest takeaway is that the criminal justice system is much different than in reality, than I had been led to believe, you know, in law school and even as a practicing attorney, actually seeing the lives. Seeing men look at their families during visitation, seeing who, as you said, which camp, which people supported you and which people didn't. Just heartbreaking in so many different ways to see how broken and dysfunctional the system is, without hyperbole. So, you know, I just think from a very personal standpoint, I've learned what's important in life. You know, I enjoy this feeling of being in solitary for 152 days. I enjoy feeling the sun on my face. Telling my kids that I love them, or just the smell of bacon. Being able to turn the lights on when I want, or turn the lights off when I want, has great value to me now in ways that it didn't for a long time. But other than that, I really don't. You meet me and maybe you can have a drink and I'll have some water with a lime in it, we'll talk, and I'll tell you a lot more about my biggest takeaways from my experience.
Thank you, Seth.
I would say simply, know who your friends are before you go through something where you learn who your friends are. Right? And, you know, I had very good fortune with a roommate of mine. He and his wife were roommates when I was still in politics, still living in New Jersey. And this was the guy at 3 o'clock in the morning. It was John Hollow. This guy at 3 o'clock in the morning picked me up to drive me to prison. And had been a friend, didn't care what I had a title, didn't care what job I had, didn't care I was, you know, building the World Trade Center, just a friend. And when I got out of prison, we knew I was getting out, we didn't know what time I was going to be released, drove all the way to Altoona, Pennsylvania, waited at a Sheetz for me to get out and drive me home. Right? Know who your friends are before you need to learn who your friends are.
Write that down now.
Michele.
I'll be selling T-shirts and mugs with that.
Bill's, you know, I got a little emotional. I was thinking about the time when my mother first visited me on Rikers Island and I was facing 15 to life in prison, and the pain that she felt to see me on the other side of this plexiglass. You know, nothing's like that. And I'm very grateful not to be at that place. You know, and I hope that, you know, you guys seeing people, like, I really have so much compassion for my colleagues here, and I'm glad that I at least went through that so that I could say, you know, follow me, there's life after all of this, and, you know, but it's a very difficult situation, and, you know, I try to stay grateful for, like, the amazing life that I have today and the ability to be able to serve, and I hope that you guys who are seeing people that maybe are more accessible for you to identify with because they lived your same life path, or, you know, to a good point until the roads parted, right? That you could also have the same compassion for every other criminal defendant, you know, or most, you know, who come across your path, who you could be assisting or helping or having compassion for.
Thank you, Michele.
I think my biggest takeaway is the importance of self-care. I think that they should have a class at law school, litigators, with how to deal with being a litigator with small children. And I think I wasn't prepared for the stress that I faced, and I dealt with it with a lot of alcohol and drugs, and I mean, I was drinking 15, 20 cups of coffee a day to get through a day with all that stuff in my system. And I look back at what happened, I think about it, it's almost like watching a movie, you know, where you're watching somebody else do it. It's even hard for me to get inside the head in my own head, which is a weird feeling. And I think that if I was going to talk to anybody about, you know, design a course or anything like that, I'd talk about the importance of self-care in a stressful industry that we're in.
If I could, Jeff, just very, very briefly, one very quick comment I want to make. I should have said, and I apologize. Not only should you know who your friends are, but, and you and I both lived because we were elected officials, and the role of your family. And that when something like this happens, it is your family that's there, right? And they're supportive. And when everybody else goes away, like, yes, you know who your friends are, but value your family before you have this trouble. Right. So I have a very good relationship with my father, and I'll finish with this very briefly, Joe. I have a very good relationship with my father, but my father sat in the trial every day behind his son, his only son, every day watching me. He sat there and he watched me get sentenced by a federal judge, and then get sentenced by a federal judge again, and sat through United States Court of Appeals and watched his son at 3 o'clock in the morning walk into prison, right? And leave to walk into prison. And having that family there and valuing it before you get into trouble. And just to finish with this, with my dad's a guy who grew up, an Irish-Italian guy from the South Bronx, never went to college, was dead set against me pleading guilty, and, you know, was a tough guy, like military tough guy. And he came to visit, and this, I want to finish with this, and the importance of visits and family are so it's so critical. And I was about 4 hours west of Hamilton, New Jersey, where Dad lived, in Altoona, Pennsylvania. I talked to him the night before, and I said, Dad, make sure you get here about 8:15 because visiting is from 8:30 to 2:30, and you got to go through secure. But if you're not here by 9:30, and we'll all know this, on a weekend they call a count at 10:30, and every prison in America. And if you're not in the visiting room by then, they make your family wait an hour, and they lock everything down to count. Like, and my father's like, no, we'll be there, don't worry about it, we'll be there at 8:30, don't worry about it. Or whatever, be there at 9, whatever it was, 9:30. And I'm ready, I put it's my first visit. And I put my uniform on that morning, and they start calling guys into the visiting room. Bear, report to the visiting room. Totilo, report to the visiting room. No Baroni. It's now 8:45, no Baroni. Now 9 o'clock, no Baroni. And for the first time that I was in Britain, I was there for about a week and a half, I had no stress. I was better there than I was on the outside, what you were saying. Now it's 9:30, I'm thinking, oh my God, there's been an accident, they've gotten lost, somebody's in the hospital, all my fears of what would happen to my family, and I blamed myself. I did this. What I did has led to this accident, led to this trip to the hospital, and my father can't call me. And I was devastated that I had done this to my family. And they call count. I am in full panic. And I pick the phone up, and I call my father's, the prison phone, call Dad's cell phone. And he answers the phone. He says, hey, bud. I'm like, hey, Pop, where are you? I said, are you lost? Is everything okay? He's like, we're in the parking lot. I said, what are you doing in the parking lot? He said, when we got here, they had shut everything down for the count. I said, yeah, Pop, but I thought you were getting here an hour ago. He said, oh, yeah, well, we came downstairs, and they were staying at the Courtyard by Marriott. We came downstairs, and, they have a breakfast buffet. And then my father said, he said what every 75-year-old dad would say, it came with the room. And then he said, and you're not going anywhere. And what it told me, and this, to be serious, it's a true story. What it told me is, when everything else goes away, it is your family that's there. And for all of you who are lawyers, who are not you're not being charged, the feds aren't coming after you, the state's not coming after you, but yet you're a lawyer and you're working 20 hours a day for your clients, which is really important, and you're not seeing your kids. And you're not seeing your family. Don't be that lawyer.
Right.
Don't make the mistake that I made and didn't pay attention enough until your father has to walk in to see you in prison.
Yeah.
So my suggestion is not only know who your friends are before you have to know who your friends are, is remember it is your family, it's going to be there in the end, so be there before that happens.
Well, thank you all. I love you all. Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming.
Hey, Mackenzie, I'm the immediate past chair of criminal justice section. And I actually remember when you first approached me to talk about doing something like this. And so I want to thank you so much for putting this together. I'm going to correct the record. See, I was at GW, but since there were more black students at Georgetown, I would go over there to hang out.
Okay. There's so much, I thought you were a classmate.
Absolutely, and I actually remember when I was national president of National Black Prosecutors Association in Philly, and you talked about your desire to run for district attorney. I want to thank each and every one of you for being here, to have the courage to share your stories, and even more importantly, to turn that experience into something positive to help others. And so we really appreciate you for being here. Please give them another round.
No, Andrew.